I never thought I'd be telling this story. Even now, as I sit in the sunroom of my new home overlooking the Pacific, watching the waves crash against the cliffs below, part of me can hardly believe what happened. But I need to get it off my chest, to make sense of how my entire life changed in the span of a few months at the age of 55. My name is Michael Donovan. For 30 years, I worked as a construction manager in Chicago, building other people's dreams while quietly constructing my own. My father, Robert Donovan, had been my hero growing up, a hard-working electrician who raised me alone after my mother died when I was just 8 years old. Dad never remarried, dedicating his life to making sure I had everything I needed. He worked double shifts, missed sleep, and sacrificed his own dreams so I could go to college and have opportunities he never had. At least, that was the story I believed. When Dad passed away last winter at the age of 81, I wasn't surprised by the modest will he left behind. His small two-bedroom house in the suburbs of Chicago, about $70,000 in savings, and his beat-up 2010 Ford F-150 pickup truck all left to me, his only child. I was executor of the estate, of course. My wife Charlotte and I had been comfortable enough in our own right, so while the inheritance wasn't life-changing, it felt like one final gift from a man who had always put me first. "You don't need to rush clearing out your dad's house," Charlotte told me as we drove back from the funeral. Snow was falling gently, coating the city in a pristine white blanket that seemed to mute the world around us. "Take all the time you need." Charlotte had always been my rock. We'd been married for 27 years, raised 2 children together, Emma, now 26, and working as a nurse in Boston, and Jason, 24, finishing up law school at Northwestern. Both kids had come home for their grandfather's funeral, but had to return to their lives quickly afterward. Charlotte and I understood, we'd raised them to be independent, just as my father had raised me. "I know," I replied, staring out the window at the familiar streets of my childhood. But Dad was always practical. He wouldn't want me dwelling too long. So the next weekend, I drove alone to Dad's house, ready to begin the painful process of sorting through his belongings. The house was exactly as he'd left it, meticulously organized, modestly furnished, with nothing extravagant or unnecessary. That was Dad's way. Growing up, he'd taught me that a man's worth wasn't measured by what he owned, but by what he built with his own 2 hands. I started in the kitchen, sorting through decades of accumulated kitchenware, much of it dating back to when my mother was still alive. Each pot and pan held memories: Sunday morning pancakes, holiday dinners, the quiet evenings when Dad would teach me how to cook simple meals so I wouldn't starve when you go off to college, as he'd put it. By late afternoon, I'd made decent progress, filling several boxes for donation and a few to keep. It was as I moved to his bedroom that the first hint something was off emerged. In his closet, behind a row of flannel shirts and worn jeans, I found a small fireproof safe I'd never seen before. It wasn't hidden, exactly, but Dad had never mentioned it to me. "Probably just important documents," I muttered to myself, setting it on the bed. The key wasn't with it, and I made a mental note to look for it later. I continued working, emptying drawers of socks and undershirts, each item a small reminder of the practical, no-nonsense man who'd raised me. In his nightstand, beneath a dog-eared Bible and a stack of utility bills, I found a small envelope with safe key written on it in Dad's neat, block handwriting. Inside was a single key and a folded note that simply read, "For Michael, when the time comes." My heart skipped a beat. There was something ominous about those words, so unlike my straightforward father. With slightly trembling hands, I took the key back to the safe and opened it. Inside were several folders, neatly labeled and organized, typical Dad. The first contained the deed to the house, his modest life insurance policy, and other documents I'd expected to find. But beneath those was a thick manila envelope labeled RD Investments that made me pause. My father had never mentioned any investments beyond his small retirement account. Opening it, I found bank statements from an account I'd never known existed, an account with Meridian Trust Bank, showing a balance of just over $2.4 million. The room seemed to tilt around me. I sat heavily on the edge of the bed, staring at the statement in disbelief. This had to be some kind of mistake. My father, the man who darned his own socks rather than buy new ones, who drove the same truck for 15 years, who clipped coupons religiously, this man had millions hidden away? But as I continued to sift through the papers, the reality became undeniable. There were investment records going back decades, property deeds for 3 commercial buildings in downtown Chicago, and stock certificates for blue-chip companies worth hundreds of thousands. All in my father's name. At the bottom of the pile was another sealed envelope with my name on it. My hand shook as I tore it open, pulling out several handwritten pages. The letter began simply, "Dear Michael, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've discovered what I've kept from you all these years. I hope you can forgive me." I read through the letter once, then again, struggling to comprehend what it was telling me. According to my father's words, he hadn't been just a hard-working electrician. In his 20s, before I was born, he'd started a small electrical contracting business that had grown successful. He'd sold it when my mother got sick, making his first significant money. After her death, instead of returning to work for someone else as he'd told me, he'd quietly invested the proceeds, buying commercial properties and making shrewd stock investments over decades. "I kept this from you for a reason," the letter continued. "I saw what money did to my own family, how it turned brother against brother, how it poisoned relationships with greed and entitlement. I wanted you to grow up valuing hard work, to build your own life without expectations of an easy path. Maybe that was wrong of me. Maybe I should have trusted you more." The letter went on to explain that there was a second will, held by a lawyer named James Patingle at a firm downtown, that would distribute this hidden fortune. "But be careful, son," the letter warned in its final paragraph. "Not everyone who calls you family has your best interests at heart. Watch, listen, and trust your instincts." I sat in the gathering darkness of my father's bedroom, the papers scattered around me, feeling as though the man I'd known my entire life had suddenly become a stranger. Why hadn't he trusted me with this? What did he mean about people not having my best interests at heart? I had no extended family, no uncles or aunts, no cousins that I knew of. It was just me, Charlotte, and our kids. As questions swirled in my mind, my phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. "Everything okay? You've been gone all day." I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. How could I explain what I just discovered in a text message? "Fine," I typed back. "Found some things that need sorting. Might be late." "Do you want me to come help?" she replied. "No," I answered quickly. Something in my father's warning made me hesitate to share this discovery just yet. "I'll tell you about it when I get home." I carefully returned everything to the safe except for the letter and the business card for James Patingle that had been paper clipped to it. I needed time to process this, to figure out what it all meant, before taking the next step. Driving home through the dark Chicago streets, my mind raced with questions. Who was the real Robert Donovan? And what secrets had he been protecting me from all these years? Little did I know that by opening that safe, I had set in motion events that would expose decades of lies, reveal betrayals from those closest to me, and force me to question everything I thought I knew about my life. The digital clock on my dashboard read 10:47 p.m. when I finally pulled into our driveway. The house was mostly dark, except for the soft glow of the living room lamp. Charlotte signaled that she was waiting up for me. I sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to decide how much to tell her tonight. My father's warning echoed in my mind. Not everyone who calls you family has your best interests at heart. No, I was being ridiculous. This was Charlotte, my wife of nearly 3 decades. If I couldn't trust her, I couldn't trust anyone. I slipped the letter into my jacket pocket and headed inside. "There you are," Charlotte said, looking up from her iPad as I entered. She was curled up on the sofa in her favorite oversized sweater, reading glasses perched on her nose. I was starting to worry. "Sorry," I said, bending to kiss her cheek. "Got caught up sorting through Dad's things." "Find anything interesting?" she asked, setting her tablet aside. I hesitated only briefly. "Actually, yes. Something unexpected." Charlotte's eyebrows rose. Oh, what kind of unexpected? I took a deep breath and sat beside her. It turns out Dad had some money put away. More than he ever let on. Well, that's not so surprising, she said with a small laugh. Your father was always frugal. We figured he had some savings. Not savings, Charlotte. Investments. Property. Stocks. I paused, watching her face. About $2.5 million worth. Her expression shifted from mild interest to shock. What? Michael, are you serious? I nodded. Found a safe in his closet. Inside was information about accounts, properties, and a letter explaining it all. My God, she whispered. Your father was secretly wealthy all this time? While he lived in that tiny house? While he worked all those extra shifts when you were growing up? Apparently. I ran a hand through my hair. He says in the letter that he wanted me to learn the value of hard work, not expect an inheritance. Charlotte was quiet for a moment, processing. That's. I don't know whether to be impressed by his principles or angry that he let you struggle when you didn't have to. I'm asking myself the same question, I admitted. There's more, though. He left instructions about a second will with a lawyer downtown. And a warning about being careful who I trust. A warning? Charlotte frowned. What kind of warning? I shrugged, suddenly reluctant to share that particular detail. Just general advice about money changing people. You know how he was always cautious, always preparing for the worst. Charlotte nodded slowly, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. Charlotte had always been quick-witted, analytical. It was what made her so good at her job as a hospital administrator. So what happens next? She asked. Tomorrow I'll call this lawyer, Pettingle. Find out about the second will, I guess. Charlotte reached over and took my hand. This is life-changing, Michael. We should talk about what this means for us, for the kids. I know, I said, squeezing her hand. But I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Let's see what this lawyer says first. We talked a while longer, with Charlotte asking questions I didn't have answers to yet. Finally, pleading exhaustion, I headed upstairs to shower and get ready for bed. As the hot water ran over me, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. My father's warning kept replaying in my mind. Was I missing something? The next morning, I called James Pettingle's office as soon as they opened. Pettingle, Hargrove, and Associates, a receptionist answered. Yes, I'd like to speak with James Pettingle, I said. My name is Michael Donovan. My father, Robert Donovan, recently passed away, and I believe Mr. Pettingle has information regarding his estate. There was a pause. One moment, please, Mr. Donovan. After a brief hold, a deep, measured voice came on the line. This is James Pettingle. I've been expecting your call, Mr. Donovan. First, let me express my condolences for your loss. Your father was a remarkable man. You knew my father well? I asked, surprised. For nearly 40 years, Pettingle replied. I handled all his legal affairs. He spoke of you often and with great pride. The revelation that this stranger knew more about my father's life than I did stung, but I pressed on. I found a letter from my father mentioning a second will in your possession. Yes, Pettingle confirmed. Robert left explicit instructions that you were to contact me after discovering his personal papers. When would you be available to come to my office? This is a matter best discussed in person. We arranged for me to visit that afternoon. Charlotte offered to come along, but something, intuition, perhaps, or my father's warning, made me decline. Let me handle this first part alone, I told her. Once I understand what we're dealing with, we can approach it together. She seemed disappointed but didn't push the issue. Of course. Let me know as soon as you learn anything.
Pettingill's office was located in a sleek downtown high-rise with views of Lake Michigan.
The reception area was all polished wood and leather, exuding old money confidence. I was promptly escorted to a conference room where Pettingill, a tall man in his 70s with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, waited for me. "Michael," he said, extending his hand. "You look just like your father did at your age." We shook hands, and he gestured for me to sit.
On the table between us was a thick folder and what appeared to be a video disc.
"Before we begin," Pettingill said, "your father asked me to show you something."
He picked up a remote and pressed a button.
A screen descended from the ceiling, and moments later, my father's face appeared. I felt a jolt seeing him, healthy, clear-eyed, but serious, addressing me from beyond the grave.
"Hello, Michael," my father began, his familiar voice filling the room.
"If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you've discovered what I kept hidden all these years.
I imagine you have questions, maybe even feel betrayed.
I hope this explanation helps you understand." For the next 20 minutes, I watched, transfixed, as my father revealed a life I'd never known. He spoke of building his business in the 1970s, of making his first million before he was 35. He talked about meeting my mother, how they'd agreed to live modestly despite their growing wealth. "When your mother got sick," he continued, his voice cracking slightly, "we had the means for the best treatments money could buy.
But pancreatic cancer, it was too aggressive, too far along when they found it. All our money couldn't save her."
He explained how her death had made him re-evaluate everything. "I saw what inherited wealth did to families, the fights, the entitlement, the ruined relationships. I decided then that I would raise you to value work, to build your own success."
"Maybe that was selfish of me, son. Maybe I should have told you the truth long ago."
Then came the part that made my blood run cold. "There's something else you need to know, Michael.
Something I've never told anyone except James here."
My father leaned forward on the screen, his expression grave. "Your mother had a sister, your Aunt Catherine. They had a falling out before you were born, and after your mother's funeral, Catherine made it clear she wanted nothing to do with us. But a few years ago, she contacted me out of the blue.
She'd been following your life from a distance, knew about Charlotte, about Emma and Jason. Said she wanted to reconnect."
My father's expression hardened. I was suspicious, but I agreed to meet. It became clear very quickly that she discovered my financial situation and was only interested in what she could get from me. When I refused to give her money, she made threats, said she had information that could hurt you and your family. I glanced at Pettingill, who was watching me carefully. "I paid her off," my father continued, shame evident in his voice. "Not my proudest moment, but I wanted to protect you.
The problem is, I don't think it ended there. I've had the feeling I'm being watched. And twice, I caught someone trying to access my financial records."
He sighed deeply. "I'm telling you this because I fear Catherine, or someone working with her, may approach you after I'm gone. The second will I've prepared leaves everything to you, but with structures in place to protect the assets.
James will explain everything. Trust him, Michael. And be careful." The video ended, leaving me stunned. An aunt I'd never known existed. Threats against my family.
It was like something out of a thriller novel, not my quiet, ordinary life. Pettingill let the silence hang for a moment before speaking.
"Your father recorded that about 18 months ago. He updated his will at the same time. This Aunt Catherine, did you ever meet her?" I asked. "Once," Pettingill nodded. "She came to the office with your father.
Very polished woman, superficially charming, but there was something calculating in her manner."
"And the threats she made, what information could she possibly have had?" Pettingill shook his head.
"Your father never specified, and I didn't press him. But he took it seriously enough to pay her a substantial sum, $500,000.
My mind was reeling. "Is she named in the will?"
"No," Pettingill said firmly.
"The will is quite clear.
Everything goes to you, though some of it through a trust structure that provides certain protections.
Protections against what? Claims against the estate, primarily.
Your father was concerned that Catherine might contest the will, claim she was entitled to a portion as your mother's sister. For the next hour, Pettingle walked me through the details of my father's estate. Beyond what I'd already discovered, there were investment accounts I hadn't known about, bringing the total closer to $3.8 million. The commercial properties generated substantial rental income. There was even a vacation home in Michigan I'd never heard mentioned. Your father lived simply, Pettingle said, but he was an exceptionally shrewd investor. He worked with the same financial advisor for 30 years.
I can arrange a meeting if you'd like. I nodded, still trying to process everything.
This trust structure, how does it work exactly?
The bulk of the estate will be placed in a revocable living trust with you as the beneficiary.
You'll have complete access to the income it generates, and you can use the principal for any purpose related to your health, education, maintenance, or support, which is legally quite broad.
The trust provides asset protection in case of lawsuits or divorce, and it keeps the details private, unlike probate. The mention of divorce struck me as odd. Why would that be a concern? Charlotte and I have been married for 27 years.
Pettingle's expression remained neutral.
Your father was simply being thorough.
These are standard protections in estate planning for high-net-worth individuals.
As our meeting concluded, Pettingle handed me a thick envelope.
These are copies of all the relevant documents, including the will and trust agreement.
Review them at your leisure.
We'll need to file the will with probate court, but the trust assets will transfer to you immediately as trustee. I stood to leave, my head swimming with information.
Thank you for everything, Mr. Pettingle. I have a feeling I'll be calling you with more questions.
I'm at your disposal, he replied, then hesitated.
One more thing, Mr. Donovan. Your father asked me to tell you to be observant in the coming weeks.
He was concerned about certain individuals taking an unusual interest in his affairs toward the end.
You mean beyond my aunt? Pettingle's face gave nothing away. I'm simply relaying the message.
Your father was a cautious man. As I drove home, the implications of everything I'd learned began to sink in. I was now a wealthy man, wealthy enough to retire immediately if I chose, to pay off our mortgage, to fund Jason's law school without loans, to help Emma buy the house she'd been saving for in Boston.
But my father's warnings cast a shadow over these possibilities. Who might be watching me? Was Catherine still out there, planning to make the same threats against me that she'd made against my father? And most troubling of all, what was this information she claimed to have that could hurt my family?
I decided to keep most of these details from Charlotte for now, at least until I had a better understanding of what I was dealing with. I would tell her about the inheritance, of course, but not about Catherine or the threats.
Not yet.
That decision, made with the best of intentions, would turn out to be my first mistake. When I arrived home, Charlotte was waiting anxiously.
Well, she asked as soon as I walked through the door. What did the lawyer say? I took a deep breath. It's all true. Dad left everything to me.
The estate is worth almost $4 million.
Charlotte's hand flew to her mouth. $4 million? Michael, that's life-changing.
I know, I said, settling on the couch beside her. There's a trust structure involved, but essentially it all comes to me.
A trust?
Charlotte frowned slightly.
What kind of trust?
Just standard estate planning stuff, I said, deliberately keeping it vague.
Pettingle says it's for asset protection, tax benefits, that sort of thing.
Charlotte nodded, but I could see her analyzing this information.
Did Pettingle explain why your father kept all this hidden? Even from you?
I gave her the simplified version: my father's desire to instill a work ethic, his concerns about inherited wealth creating entitlement. I left out any mention of Catherine or threats against the family. That's admirable, I guess, Charlotte said. But also a little paternalistic, don't you think? You were a grown man with your own family, not a child who needed to be taught a lesson. I've been thinking the same thing, I admitted. Part of me is angry he didn't trust me with the truth. Charlotte was quiet for a moment, then asked, "So what do we do now?" "With the money, I mean." "We don't have to decide anything right away," I said. "Let's take some time to think about it. Maybe pay off the mortgage, set aside money for the kids. Beyond that." I shrugged. "We've been happy with our life so far, right?" "Of course," Charlotte said quickly. "But this opens up possibilities we never had before. You could retire early. We could travel more. Maybe get that lake house we've always talked about." I smiled, trying to match her enthusiasm while pushing away the unease I still felt. "All of that's on the table now. Let's just not rush into anything." Charlotte leaned over and kissed me. "This is wonderful news, Michael. Your father gave us a tremendous gift." "He did," I agreed, though I couldn't help wondering if that gift came with strings attached that I didn't fully understand yet. Over the next few days, I divided my time between continuing to clear out my father's house and meeting with Patingle to sign paperwork for the estate. I also met with my father's financial advisor, a sharp-eyed woman named Elaine Winters, who walked me through the investment portfolio in detail. "Your father was conservative but savvy," she explained. "Blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds for tax advantages, commercial real estate in growing areas of the city. Nothing flashy, but consistently strong performers." I was impressed by the methodical way my father had built wealth over decades, even as I continued to struggle with the fact that he'd hidden it from me. As Elaine showed me the account statements, I noticed something odd. "What are these regular withdrawals?" I asked, pointing to a series of $10,000 transfers that had occurred monthly over the past year. Elaine frowned. "I'm not sure. Your father managed some aspects of his finances himself. These appear to be transfers to another account, but not one that I oversaw." That evening, I mentioned the mysterious transfers to Patingle by phone. He said, the line crackling slightly. "That's concerning. Your father never mentioned regular withdrawals of that size to me. I'll look into it and get back to you." 3 days later, Patingle called me at work. "I've found something," he said without preamble. "Those transfers were going to an account at First Chicago Bank. I've obtained the records through legal channels, and it appears the account holder is a CRD Holdings LLC." "What's CRD Holdings?" I asked. "That's what's interesting. It's a limited liability company registered in Wyoming, a state known for corporate privacy. The registered agent is a firm that specializes in creating anonymous business entities. In other words, someone went to considerable effort to hide their identity." My stomach tightened. "You think this is related to what my father mentioned? About Catherine?" "It's possible," Patingle said carefully. "The timing aligns with when he said he was approached. I'm continuing to investigate." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake beside Charlotte, watching the digital clock tick past 2 a.m., then 3 a.m., my mind racing with questions. Who was behind CRD Holdings? Was my mysterious aunt still out there, planning to approach me next? And what could she possibly know that had frightened my father enough to pay her off? I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Charlotte, and went downstairs to my home office. I opened my laptop and began searching for information about Catherine, my mother's sister, whose existence I'd only learned of days ago. My mother's maiden name had been Elizabeth Reynolds, so I searched for Catherine Reynolds, Chicago. The results were too numerous to be helpful. I tried adding my mother's birth year, assuming they might be close in age, but still found nothing conclusive. On a hunch, I tried CRD Holdings LLC. Nothing relevant appeared. Then it hit me, CRD. Catherine Reynolds Donovan? Had she married someone with my father's last name? It seemed far-fetched, but I tried searching for Catherine Donovan Chicago. The fifth result made my blood run cold. It was a real estate listing for a luxury condo in downtown Chicago, sold 6 months ago. The selling agent was listed as Catherine R. Donovan, the Donovan Group. I clicked through to the real estate agency's website and found myself staring at a professional headshot of a woman in her early 60s with styled blonde hair and a confident smile. There was something in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw, that reminded me disturbingly of old photos of my mother. The website described Catherine R. Donovan as founder and CEO of the Donovan Group, specializing in luxury properties throughout Chicago's Gold Coast and North Shore communities. With over 25 years of experience. My hand shaking slightly, I scrolled through the site until I found the company address, a sleek office on Michigan Avenue. I wrote it down, then continued searching for more information about Catherine. Social media provided more pieces of the puzzle. Catherine had a carefully curated presence on several platforms, always professionally dressed, often photographed at charity galas and high-end social events. She appeared to be unmarried with no children, lived in an expensive lakefront condo, and moved in wealthy circles. I was so engrossed in my research that I didn't hear Charlotte coming downstairs until she spoke from the doorway. "Michael? It's 4:30 in the morning. What are you doing?" I jumped, quickly minimizing the browser window. "Sorry, couldn't sleep. Just catching up on some work emails." Charlotte frowned, unconvinced. "Work emails at this hour? What's going on?" I hesitated. I'd been keeping Catherine's existence from Charlotte, unsure what to make of my father's warnings. But as I looked at my wife's concerned face, I felt a wave of guilt. We'd never kept secrets from each other until now. "Actually," I said, "I found out something else about my father's situation. Something I haven't told you." I gestured for her to sit and explained everything: the video my father had left, Catherine's existence, the threats, the mysterious payments. I showed her the website I'd discovered. Charlotte listened intently, her expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Why didn't you tell me this right away?" she asked when I finished. "I was trying to protect you," I admitted. "And honestly, I wasn't sure what to make of it all. It seemed so dramatic. Not like my father at all." Charlotte was quiet for a moment, studying the photo of Catherine on my screen. "She does look a bit like your mother," she finally said. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. Patingal is investigating the payments, but..." I trailed off, uncertain. "But you want to confront her yourself," Charlotte finished for me. She knew me too well. "I'm thinking about it," I acknowledged. "I want to know what kind of information she claimed to have. What was she using to blackmail my father?" Charlotte put her hand on my arm. "Be careful, Michael. If she was willing to extort your father, who knows what else she might do?" "I will," I promised. "I just need to understand what's happening." Charlotte nodded slowly. "We'll figure it out together. But no more secrets, okay? We're partners in this, like everything else." "No more secrets," I agreed, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. But as we went back upstairs to try to get a few more hours of sleep before dawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important, that there were more secrets yet to be uncovered, perhaps closer to home than I realized. The next day was Friday. I told Charlotte I was going to work, but instead, I drove downtown to the address of the Donovan Group. The office was exactly what I'd expected: sleek, modern, radiating success and exclusivity. Through the glass front, I could see a receptionist at a minimalist desk and walls lined with photos of multi-million-dollar properties. I sat in my car across the street for nearly an hour, gathering my courage and trying to decide what to say if I actually came face to face with this aunt I'd never known. Eventually, I saw a woman matching Catherine's photos exit the building and walk toward a black Mercedes parked nearby. Without giving myself time to reconsider, I got out of my car and approached her. "Catherine?" I called out. "Catherine Donovan?" She turned, a polite but distant smile on her face, the expression of someone used to being recognized by strangers. Up close, the resemblance to my mother was even more pronounced, sending an eerie chill through me. "Yes," she replied, her voice cultured and smooth. "Can I help you?" "My name is Michael Donovan," I said, watching her face carefully. "Robert Donovan was my father." The change in her expression was subtle but unmistakable, a momentary widening of the eyes, a tightening around the mouth, quickly masked by a practiced smile. "Michael," she said, recovering quickly. "What a surprise. I heard about Robert's passing. My condolences." "Did you?" I asked, my tone harder than I'd intended. "How exactly did you hear, given that you and my father weren't in contact?" Her smile never faltered. "Chicago is a small town in some ways, especially in certain circles. News travels." She glanced at her watch. "I'm actually running late for an appointment, but perhaps we could meet for coffee sometime? Catch up properly?" "I think we should," I agreed, trying to match her calm demeanor while my heart pounded. "I have quite a few questions about your relationship with my father." Something flashed in her eyes, caution, perhaps, or calculation. "Of course. Why don't you give me your number? I'll have my assistant set something up next week." I handed her my business card, which she took with manicured fingers. "I'm very interested in discussing CRD Holdings," I added, watching her closely. This time, her composure slipped noticeably. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," she said, but the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I think you do," I pressed. "Along with the payments my father was making to that account. The question is why?" Catherine's pleasant facade hardened into something colder. "You're obviously upset and confused, Michael. Your father and I had our own arrangements that don't concern you. I'd suggest you be careful about making accusations you can't substantiate." "Is that a threat?" I asked quietly. She gave a light, artificial laugh. "Of course not. Just some friendly advice from family." She emphasized the last word with a hint of mockery. "I really must go now. I'll have Brenda call you about that coffee." Before I could respond, she slipped into her car and drove away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with more questions than answers. I called Pettingill immediately and told him about the encounter. "That was extremely unwise, Mr. Donovan," he said, his voice sharp with disapproval. "We don't yet understand what we're dealing with here." "I needed to see her for myself," I explained. "To gauge her reaction." "And what did you learn?" "That she's hiding something," I said firmly. The mention of CRD Holdings rattled her. And there was something threatening in her manner. Pettingill sighed. "I've made some progress on that front. CRD Holdings purchased a property last year, a small office building on the north side. Guess who the real estate agent was?" "Catherine," I said without hesitation. "Correct. And the building was purchased for 20% above market value. It appears to have been a way to funnel additional money to her beyond the direct payments from your father's account." "So he was definitely paying her off," I murmured, the reality of it sinking in. "But why? What could she possibly have known that was worth millions?" "That remains the central question," Pettingill agreed. "I've hired a private investigator to look deeper into Catherine's background and activities. In the meantime, I strongly advise you to avoid further direct contact with her." I agreed reluctantly and headed home, my mind racing. I decided not to tell Charlotte about my confrontation with Catherine, no sense worrying her further. Another small secret, another crack in our usual openness with each other. That evening, Charlotte and I were having a quiet dinner when she brought up something unexpected. "I've been thinking about your father's estate," she began casually. "Have you considered what this means for our retirement plans?" "Not in detail," I admitted. "Everything's happened so quickly." Well, I've been running some numbers, she continued, an enthusiasm in her voice I hadn't heard in a while. With this inheritance, we could both retire now. Sell the house, buy something on the water like we've always talked about. Maybe even get a place in Florida for the winters. I looked at her in surprise. Charlotte had always been the more fiscally conservative of the two of us, the one who insisted on maxing out our 401(k)s and building a solid emergency fund before making any major purchases. That's a pretty dramatic change, I said carefully. What about your job? You've always said you want to work until at least 62. She waved a hand dismissively. That was before. This changes everything, Michael. We've worked hard our whole lives. Don't we deserve to enjoy ourselves now that we can afford to? Something about her eagerness made me uneasy. Let's not rush into anything. We should take some time to adjust to this new reality before making life-altering decisions. Charlotte's smile faded slightly. I thought you'd be excited. This is what we've dreamed about, financial freedom, the chance to really live before we're too old to enjoy it. I am excited, I assured her. Just cautious. And there's still the situation with Catherine to resolve. At the mention of Catherine, something shifted in Charlotte's expression, a flicker of, what? Annoyance? Concern? It was gone too quickly for me to interpret. What does she have to do with our plans? Charlotte asked, her tone slightly sharper. Nothing directly, I backpedaled. I just want to understand what was happening with my father before we make any big moves. Charlotte studied me for a moment, then nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. I just thought you'd be more excited about the possibilities. We finished dinner in a slightly strained silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us, some invisible boundary had been crossed. The next morning, I woke early, Charlotte still asleep beside me. On a sudden impulse, I reached for her phone on the nightstand. We'd always known each other's passcodes, and open phone policy had been part of our relationship from the beginning. I entered her code and began scrolling through her recent calls and texts. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it, a text exchange from 3 days ago with a number not saved in her contacts. The conversation was brief but chilling. Unknown, did he tell you everything? Charlotte, not at first. Had to push. Trust set up. Trying to delay decisions. Unknown, keep pressing. Time matters now. Charlotte, I know. Working on it. My hands went cold as I stared at the screen. What was this? Who was Charlotte texting about me, about the trust? I quickly checked her call history and found several calls to the same number over the past 2 weeks, including one the day after I told her about finding my father's safe. I heard Charlotte stirring and quickly replaced her phone on the nightstand, my heart hammering in my chest. As she blinked awake and smiled at me, I forced myself to smile back, my mind reeling with questions and a growing sense of betrayal. Morning, she murmured sleepily. You're up early. Just thinking about everything that's happened, I said, trying to keep my voice normal. Think I'll go for a run, clear my head. Good idea, she said, stretching. I might go shopping later. We should celebrate a little, don't you think? Maybe I'll pick up a bottle of that champagne you like. I nodded mechanically and got out of bed, grabbing my running clothes. As I laced up my shoes downstairs, my mind was racing. Was Charlotte somehow involved with Catherine? Had my own wife been spying on me, reporting back to someone else? The thought was so painful, so contrary to everything I believed about our marriage, that I initially rejected it. There had to be another explanation. But the texts were clear, Charlotte was communicating with someone about me, about the inheritance, about the trust. Instead of going for a run, I drove to a coffee shop and called Patingle. I need to meet with you today, I said without preamble when he answered. It's urgent. What's happened? He asked, instantly alert. Not over the phone, I insisted.
Can you meet me at your office in an hour? He agreed, and I spent the drive downtown trying to make sense of what I'd discovered. By the time I arrived at Pettingill's office, I'd worked myself into a state of barely contained panic. "You look terrible," Pettingill observed as I was shown into his office. "What's going on?" I told him about the texts I'd found on Charlotte's phone, watching his expression grow increasingly grave. "This is concerning," he said when I finished. "Particularly in light of what the private investigator has uncovered." "What do you mean? What did he find?" Pettingill opened a folder on his desk. "Catherine Reynolds Donovan changed her name in 1987. She was born Catherine Reynolds, your mother's sister as we knew, but she married briefly in her 20s. Her husband's last name wasn't Donovan, it was Harrington. She adopted the Donovan name after your father became successful, presumably to capitalize on the connection, though she publicly denies any relation to your family." "So she's been using our name for business purposes?" I asked, confused about why this mattered. "That's not the concerning part," Pettingill continued. "The investigator found evidence that Catherine has been in contact with someone in your immediate circle for at least the past year. Phone records show regular calls to a number that we've now identified as belonging to Charlotte." I finished for him, my worst fears confirmed. Pettingill nodded grimly. "Your wife and Catherine have been in communication since approximately 14 months ago. The first call came from Catherine to Charlotte." I felt physically ill. "So all this time, what? Charlotte has been spying on me for Catherine? Reporting on my father's health? Waiting for him to die so they could get his money?" "We don't know the full extent of their arrangement," Pettingill cautioned. "But it appears your wife has been less than forthright with you." I slumped in my chair, trying to process this betrayal. What was my father being blackmailed about? What's this information Catherine claimed to have? Pettingill hesitated. "The investigator is still working on that angle. But there's something else you should know. The trust your father established has specific provisions that would be triggered if you were to divorce." "Divorce?" I repeated, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "What provisions?" "In the event of a divorce, the trust assets would be protected. Charlotte would have no claim to them. They would pass directly to your children instead, with you as trustee until they reach 40 years of age." The implication hit me like a physical blow. My father suspected Charlotte might be after his money? That's why he structured the trust this way? "I can't speak to what he knew or suspected," Pettingill said carefully. "But he was clearly concerned about protecting the family wealth." I sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I'd married with this picture of calculated deception. "What do I do now?" I finally asked. "Proceed with extreme caution," Pettingill advised. "Don't confront Charlotte yet. We need more information about what exactly she and Catherine are planning. The investigator is continuing to dig. In the meantime, I suggest you maintain normalcy at home while being very careful about what information you share." I nodded numbly. "And the estate? The probate process?" "We'll continue as planned. The formal reading of the will is scheduled for next Friday. Catherine has no legal claim to your father's estate, regardless of any threats she might make." As I left Pettingill's office, I felt as though I was walking through a nightmare. My father's warnings now made perfect sense. He had discovered Charlotte's betrayal but had chosen to protect me from the truth, instead setting up safeguards to ensure his wealth wouldn't fall into the wrong hands. The drive home was a blur. My mind kept replaying moments from the past year, reinterpreting them through this new, devastating lens. Charlotte's increased interest in my father's health. Her questions about his finances. Her sudden enthusiasm about retirement now that the inheritance had been revealed. Had our entire marriage been a lie? Or had something changed along the way, turning the woman I loved into someone who could conspire behind my back? When I arrived home, Charlotte's car was gone out shopping, as she'd mentioned.
I went to our home office and began searching through her desk drawers, looking for any additional evidence of her deception. In the back of her bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old greeting cards, I found a small notebook. Inside were handwritten notes, dates, times, and brief descriptions of conversations. Many of the entries were about my father. Our mentioned investment property downtown during dinner. Anne seemed unaware. Are looking friendlier today. Difficulty with stairs. Refused help as usual. Are asked pointed questions about our retirement plans. Suspect he's suspicious. The last entry was dated just 3 days before my father's death. Are called while I'm at work. Said he knows everything and has taken care of it. Sounded final. Need to warn C. My hand shook as I put the notebook back exactly as I'd found it. The woman who'd shared my bed for 27 years, the mother of my children, had been monitoring my father like a vulture, waiting for him to die, reporting back to Catherine. I heard the garage door opening and quickly left the office, my heart pounding. I needed to act normal, to not tip my hand until I understood the full extent of their scheme. Charlotte entered carrying shopping bags, her face brightening when she saw me. You're home. I thought you'd be out longer. Cut my run short, I said, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. Ankle was bothering me. Poor baby, she said sympathetically. Well, I got that champagne. And I thought we could invite the kids for dinner next weekend, tell them about the inheritance. They'll be so excited. I forced a smile. Good idea. But let's wait until after the formal reading of the will on Friday. Make sure everything's official before we start celebrating. Oh, there's a formal reading? Charlotte asked, her tone casual but her eyes suddenly more focused. You didn't mention that. Pettingle just scheduled it, I lied. Standard procedure, apparently. Will I be attending too? She asked, putting away her purchases. Of course, I said, watching her carefully. Your family. She smiled, and I wondered how I'd never noticed the calculation behind her eyes before. Great. I'll make sure my schedule is clear. That night, lying beside her in bed, listening to her even breathing as she slept, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. The person I trusted most had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. And I still didn't fully understand why. What hold did Catherine have over Charlotte? Was it simply money? Or was there more to this conspiracy than I'd yet uncovered? As I stared at the ceiling, one thing became crystal clear: I needed to beat them at their own game. If Charlotte and Catherine wanted to play with my family's legacy, they were about to learn they'd chosen the wrong opponent. The week that followed was the most difficult of my life. Every moment at home was a performance, maintaining the facade of normalcy while secretly working with Pettingle and the private investigator to uncover the full extent of Charlotte and Catherine's conspiracy. The investigator, a former FBI agent named Hargrove, reported back with disturbing findings. He'd managed to access Catherine's email through legal means, a detail I didn't ask about, and discovered communications going back nearly 2 years. The earliest messages were from Catherine to Charlotte, making reference to our shared situation and the opportunity with Robert Donovan. It appears your aunt approached your wife with some kind of proposition, Hargrove explained during a clandestine meeting at Pettingle's office. From the context, I believe she may have had information about your wife that she used as leverage. Blackmail, I said flatly. She blackmailed Charlotte into helping her get to my father's money. That's our working theory, Pettingle agreed. And then your father discovered the scheme, which led to him paying off Catherine directly. But what information could she possibly have had? I asked for what felt like the 100th time. Charlotte and I have been married for 27 years. I would know if there were skeletons in her closet. Hargrove and Pettingle exchanged glances. There's one email that might shed light on that, Hargrove said carefully. From Catherine to Charlotte, dated about 18 months ago. It references something called the Denver situation and suggests that Michael would be devastated to learn the truth after all these years.
I frowned. Denver? We've never lived in Denver. Charlotte grew up in Minneapolis, went to college in Wisconsin. I don't understand the connection.
We're still investigating, Hargrove assured me. But whatever the Denver situation refers to, it appears to be the leverage Catherine is using against your wife. As Friday approached, the day of the formal will reading, I noticed Charlotte becoming increasingly tense. She made several calls from our home office with the door closed, and twice I caught her checking her phone with an anxious expression. Thursday night, I pretended to go to bed early, complaining of a headache. Instead, I waited until Charlotte was in the shower, then crept down to her car in the garage. Using the techniques Hargrove had taught me, I placed a small, legal recording device under the dashboard, one that would activate with the car's ignition. The next morning, Charlotte announced she had errands to run before the afternoon will reading.
Want me to come along? I offered innocently.
No need, she said quickly. Just some boring stuff, dry cleaning, prescription pickup.
I'll meet you at Pettingle's office at 2.
I nodded, watching her leave with the knowledge that her every word would be recorded. It was a gamble, but I was desperate for answers before confronting her with what I knew. When Charlotte was gone, I called Emma and Jason. I decided to bring them into the loop partially. I told them about discovering my father's hidden wealth, about the formal will reading that afternoon, but not about my suspicions regarding their mother. I asked them both to come to Chicago immediately, telling them it was important they be present.
Both agreed to make arrangements, though they couldn't arrive until the next day.
At 1:30, I drove to Pettingle's office, arriving early for the will reading as planned. Catherine showed up 15 minutes later, dressed impeccably in a designer suit, her expression a mask of appropriate solemnity.
Michael, she greeted me with a nod. I'm sorry we haven't had that coffee yet. Things have been rather hectic.
I'm sure they have, I replied coldly. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Pettingle escorted us to the conference room where we'd be meeting. As we waited for Charlotte to arrive, the tension in the room was palpable. At exactly 2 o'clock, there was a commotion in the reception area. I heard Charlotte's voice, raised in argument with someone. Moments later, she burst into the conference room, looking flustered. I'm sorry I'm late, she began, then stopped short when she saw Catherine.
What is she doing here? Catherine smiled thinly.
I was invited, of course. As Robert's only surviving sibling-in-law, I have an interest in these proceedings. You have no legal standing here, Pettingle said firmly.
But Mr. Donovan requested your presence.
Charlotte shot me a confused, almost betrayed look.
Michael? You invited her? I thought it was important that all interested parties be present, I said evenly. Shall we begin? Pettingle nodded and opened a folder containing my father's will.
As he began to read the formal legal language, I watched Charlotte and Catherine carefully. They sat on opposite sides of the table, seemingly at odds, yet I knew they were conspirators. It was a convincing performance. When Pettingle reached the key provisions of the will, the trust structure, the protections against divorce claims, the conditions under which the assets would pass directly to my children, I saw Charlotte's face pale slightly. Catherine's expression remained unchanged, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped her designer handbag. So as you can see, Pettingle concluded, Robert Donovan's estate passes entirely to his son, Michael, with certain protections in place to ensure the assets remain within the direct bloodline.
This is outrageous, Catherine said, right on cue. My sister would have wanted me to be provided for. Robert promised me. Robert promised you nothing, I interrupted coldly.
Except perhaps payments to keep you quiet about whatever you were threatening him with.
Catherine's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, I countered. CRD Holdings. The monthly payments.
The property purchase at 20% above market value.
It's all documented, Catherine.
Charlotte was looking back and forth between us, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing alarm.
Michael, what's going on?
I turned to my wife, the woman I loved and trusted for nearly 3 decades. That's what I'd like to know, Charlotte.
Why don't you tell me about the Denver situation?
The color drained from Charlotte's face.
How do you know about that?
I finished for her.
I know a lot of things now. About the calls between you and Catherine. About your little notebook where you documented my father's declining health. About the texts discussing the trust and the need to keep pressing. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears.
Michael, please, you don't understand.
Then explain it to me,
I demanded, my voice breaking slightly despite my efforts to remain controlled. Explain why my wife of 27 years has been conspiring with this woman against me and my father.
Catherine stood abruptly. This is absurd. I won't sit here and be accused. Sit down, Pettingill commanded with unexpected authority.
Or I'll have security escort you out.
We're not finished here.
To my surprise, Catherine complied, though her face was tight with anger. Before we continue, Pettingill said, I should inform you both that we have evidence of your communications.
Emails. Phone records. Text messages. And as of this morning. He nodded to me.
I pulled out my phone and played the recording Hargrove had retrieved from the device in Charlotte's car.
Catherine's voice filled the room. He knows something.
I'm not sure how much, but he mentions CRD Holdings to me directly.
What? Charlotte's voice panicked. How could he know about that? His father must have left more information than we anticipated. We need to accelerate the timeline. Can you access the trust documents?
I've been trying, but he's being careful. And now he's invited the kids to come this weekend.
That complicates things.
We need to act before they arrive. Remember our agreement, Charlotte. If this falls apart, you have more to lose than I do.
I stopped the recording, the silence in the room deafening. Charlotte was openly crying now. Michael, please, I can explain.
I'm listening, I said, my voice hard.
She took a shuddering breath.
It started about 2 years ago.
Catherine contacted me out of the blue.
She said she knew something about me, something from before we met. Something that would destroy our marriage if you ever found out. The Denver situation, I prompted.
Charlotte nodded miserably.
I lived in Denver briefly after college, before we met.
I was in a relationship with someone. It ended badly. Very badly. How badly?
I asked, watching her carefully. Charlotte closed her eyes.
He was abusive.
One night, he attacked me.
I defended myself. He fell, hit his head on a coffee table. He died, Michael.
I stared at her in shock.
This was not what I had expected.
It was ruled self-defense, Charlotte continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The case was closed. I moved, changed my name slightly, from Charlton to Charlotte, and tried to put it behind me. I never told you because I was ashamed, afraid you wouldn't understand.
How did you know about this? I asked Catherine.
Catherine's composure was cracking. The man was my cousin, she admitted. I always believed Charlotte got away with murder. When I discovered she was married to Robert Donovan's son, I saw an opportunity. So you blackmailed my wife, I said flatly.
Threatened to tell me about something that happened before we even met.
Something that was legally ruled self-defense.
You don't know what she did, Catherine hissed. The police didn't have all the facts.
Neither do you, Charlotte shot back, suddenly fierce.
You weren't there.
You didn't see what he did to me, what he threatened to do. I turned back to Charlotte.
So you agreed to help Catherine get to my father's money in exchange for her silence? Charlotte nodded, tears streaming down her face. At first, I just gave her information about your father's health, his habits, when he might be vulnerable to her approach. I told myself I wasn't really doing anything wrong, just talking about my father-in-law. And then? Then your father somehow figured out what was happening. He confronted me about 6 months ago, told me he knew I was working with Catherine. I broke down, told him everything. About Denver, about Catherine's threats. I remembered the note in Charlotte's journal, are called while I'm at work. Said he knows everything and has taken care of it. So my father knew, I said. And he paid Catherine off to protect you. To protect me from learning about Denver. Yes, Charlotte whispered. He was so kind, Michael. So understanding. He said family protects family, and that I was his family too. He agreed to pay Catherine to leave us alone, but he made me promise to end all contact with her. But you didn't, I pointed out. You kept communicating with her, even after my father's death. Charlotte looked down at her hands. She came back after the funeral. Said the agreement died with your father? That now she wanted a portion of the inheritance or she'd tell you everything, not just about Denver, but about my involvement in her scheme. I was trapped, Michael. I didn't know what to do. I sat back, trying to process everything I'd heard. My father had discovered Charlotte's betrayal but had chosen forgiveness and protection over exposure. He'd restructured his estate to protect the assets from Catherine's reach while still providing for me and my children. He'd paid a fortune to buy Charlotte's safety and mine. You should have told me the truth, I said to Charlotte. About Denver. About Catherine's blackmail. I would have understood. Would you? She asked, her voice small. I killed a man, Michael. However justified, that's not something you just casually mention over dinner. We've been married for 27 years, I reminded her. We've built a life together, raised children together. Did you really think I would abandon you over something that happened before we even met? Something that wasn't your fault? Fresh tears spilled down Charlotte's cheeks. I was scared. And then it went on so long, the lie grew so big. I didn't know how to find my way back to the truth. I turned to Catherine, who was watching our exchange with calculating eyes. And you? You would destroy your own niece's family for money? Blackmail an innocent woman over a tragedy that was ruled self-defense decades ago? Innocent? Catherine scoffed. She killed Scott and got away with it. And your precious father was no saint either, building his fortune while pretending to be a simple working man, lying to his only son for decades. My father had his reasons, I said. And whatever his flaws, he put family first. Which is more than I can say for you. I looked at Pettingill, who had been quietly observing the confrontation. What are our options here? Pettingill cleared his throat. Catherine has committed blackmail, a criminal offense. We have sufficient evidence to bring charges. However, that would necessarily involve making public the very information she's been using as leverage. I considered this. And if we don't pursue criminal charges? Then we could negotiate a settlement, Pettingill said carefully. In exchange for Catherine signing a legally binding non-disclosure agreement and relinquishing any claims against your father's estate, we could offer a one-time payment. Absolutely not, I said firmly. I won't give her a cent more than my father already did. Michael, Charlotte said quietly. Maybe we should consider. No, I cut her off. I have a different proposal. I turned to Catherine. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a document confessing to your blackmail scheme. You'll agree never to contact my family again. You'll return the money my father paid you, all of it. And in exchange, we won't press charges. Catherine laughed incredulously. Why would I agree to that? You'd be exposing your wife's secret too if you went public. True, I acknowledged. But I'm willing to face that. Are you willing to face prison? To lose your real estate license? Your reputation? Your freedom? Because I promise you, if you refuse this offer, I will pursue this to the fullest extent of the law, whatever the cost to my family. I could see the calculation happening behind Catherine's eyes, weighing the risks, considering her options. You have until Monday to decide, I added. Pettingill will draw up the papers. If we don't hear from you by noon, we'll be contacting the district attorney's office. Catherine stood, gathering her belongings with as much dignity as she could muster. This isn't over, Michael. Yes, I said firmly. It is. After she left, Charlotte and I sat in silence for a long moment. What happens now? She finally asked, her voice small. I sighed heavily. Now we go home. We really talk. And tomorrow, we tell Emma and Jason the truth. About their grandfather's fortune, about Denver, about all of it. No more secrets in this family. And us? Charlotte asked, fear evident in her eyes. What about us, Michael? I looked at my wife, this woman I'd loved for decades, who had made terrible mistakes but out of fear, not malice. Who had been carrying a devastating secret our entire marriage. We have a lot to work through, I said honestly. Trust has been broken. It won't be easy to rebuild. Charlotte nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks again. I understand if you can't forgive me. I reached across the table and took her hand, the first time I touched her with genuine feeling since discovering her betrayal. My father forgave you, I said softly. He understood that family is worth fighting for, worth protecting. I think I need to try to honor that example. The relief on Charlotte's face was painful to witness. I never deserved your father's forgiveness. Or yours. Maybe not, I agreed. But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's a choice. A difficult one sometimes. As we left Pettingill's office together, I felt the weight of everything that had happened, my father's decades of deception, Charlotte's hidden past and recent betrayal, Catherine's malicious scheming. But beneath that weight was something else, a sense that the truth, however painful, had finally been exposed to the light. The next day, Emma and Jason arrived from Boston and Chicago respectively. Charlotte and I sat them down in the living room and told them everything about their grandfather's secret fortune, about Catherine's blackmail, about their mother's past in Denver, about my discovery of the conspiracy. We answered their questions honestly, holding nothing back. They were shocked, confused, angry at times, but they were also remarkably compassionate, especially toward their mother once they understood the full story. Grandpa kept secrets to protect the family, Emma observed thoughtfully. And so did Mom, in her way. Maybe that's where I get my protective instincts from. Jason, the future lawyer, had more practical concerns. What about Catherine? Do you think she'll take the deal? She did, I confirmed, having received a call from Pettingill that morning. She's returning the money and signing the agreement. She knows when she's beaten. The days that followed were difficult but healing. Charlotte and I began marriage counseling, working through the damage done by decades of secrets and months of betrayal. I met with my father's financial advisor to better understand the estate I'd inherited and how best to manage it. And slowly, our family began to rebuild on a foundation of truth rather than deception. 3 months later, I stood on the deck of a lakeside cabin in Michigan, the vacation property my father had owned for years but never mentioned to me. Emma and Jason were down by the water, skipping stones across the still surface. Charlotte was inside, preparing dinner. We decided to keep our home in Chicago but use some of the inheritance to renovate this place as a family retreat. As I watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I thought about my father, the man I'd known, and the man I'd never really known at all. He'd kept secrets believing he was protecting me, just as Charlotte had kept her secret believing she was protecting our family. Both had been wrong in their methods but right in their intentions. My phone buzzed with a text from Pettingill, final paperwork filed today. Catherine made good on her promise. Account closed. It was over. The secret that had hung over our family for decades was finally put to rest. There would be no more payments, no more threats, no more lies. I texted back a simple thank you, then put my phone away. Charlotte came out onto the deck, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Dinner's almost ready. Should I call the kids? I looked at my wife, really looked at her. The woman who had made a terrible mistake in fear, who had nearly lost everything as a result, who was now working every day to rebuild what had been broken. I saw the lines around her eyes, the silver strands in her hair, the familiar curve of her smile that still, despite everything, made my heart beat faster. In a minute, I said, reaching for her hand. Let's just watch the sunset first. As we stood together, I realized that my father's greatest gift hadn't been the money he'd left behind. It had been the example he'd set of forgiveness, of family first, of fighting to protect what matters most. In his own imperfect way, he'd shown me what it means to love unconditionally. I squeezed Charlotte's hand, and she squeezed back. We had a long road ahead, but for the first time in months, I felt certain we would walk it together. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.